The inheritance they tried to steal. My name is Philip Thomas, 29M, and for most of my life I've been the quiet one in the room. The kid people forgot to ask about, the adult no one expected anything from. I never made trouble, never demanded attention. I just tried to exist without disappointing anyone. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother. TLDR. My grandmother left me, her quiet grandson who showed up most mornings and pruned her roses, her entire estate. My family immediately accused me of stealing her will. They sued. I fought back. The legal fight became personal, and in the process, I found a box of evidence she'd left for me. That box changed everything. I was born into a family that treated presents like an optional subscription. People showed up when it was convenient: birthdays, weddings, funerals. They called on the right occasions and wore the right faces. I never minded the shape of our household. I protected myself by learning how to be small, how to disappear politely into the edges of conversation. It's a useful skill if your family prefers loud personalities. I have a name for people like me, background actors. We are necessary but rarely credited. My grandmother, Eleanor Harrow, was not like them. Eleanor made space. She would stop whatever she was doing, sweeping a floor, peeling an apple, watering a shrub, and ask exactly the sort of question that made you feel like a center of the world. She would lean forward, hands in guttered pockets, and wait. I used to brush it off as theatricality. Later I learned it was something rarer: attention. When other relatives would parade in and out and make arrangements, she stayed. She read my stupid novels and actually listened. She taught me to prune roses in the summer and to tie back the branches in the winter. When my father was busy importanting himself at finance conferences and my mother rehearsed sympathy at funerals, Grandma gave me a few stolen hours on her crooked porch and the kind of small, steady care that keeps people human. So when she died, it should have been obvious who hurt the most. I had sat with her the night before she passed, watched an old movie with her, made horrible tea because that's what she liked, smoothed the rough of her hand, so I felt like I had earned some measure of sorrow. I felt it, in a quiet, private way. What I did not expect was the theater. The house filled with relatives who knew precisely how to arrange grief. They wore navy and beige and said the backwards things. "We'll be here for you," while they were already rehearsing the lines that would help them keep things. At the reading of the will, my mother cleared her throat before the lawyer finished reading the first sentence. That's a thing people do when they have prepared a show. I brought a bouquet, marigolds and daisies, because she'd once told me they matched her curtains. The lawyer's pace was measured, rehearsed. He read the boilerplate first: funeral directives, charitable bequests, and then the line that felt like a bucket of cold water. To my grandson, Philip Thomas, I bequeath my estate at 17 Kirkwell Lane, my savings and all other assets. There was a sound after that. It wasn't a gasp. It was an audible recalibration of expectations. My sister laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. My cousin Andrew went very still. My mother's face contorted in a way I'd only seen in soap operas. Surprise, then outrage, then that familiar practiced indignation. "This is wrong," she said before she knew the rest of the sentence. Then louder. She was confused. She was not herself. "We have to contest this. This must be a mistake." Everyone reached for the same narratives that give entitlement legitimacy. Confusion, coercion, infirmity, mistake. Those words slid out 1,000 little knives, each aimed at the idea that my grandmother could make a clear choice. It was easier for them to assume she had been coaxed into an odd decision than to accept that she'd looked at the whole messy human board and decided I was the one she trusted. I felt oddly calm in that room, not because I was untouchable, but because I had grown used to being overlooked. This, crudely, was permission for everyone to act the way they acted anyway. They moved with performance. My mother called relatives. My aunt asked if someone could bring a casserole. Andrew muttered something about legal recourse. The family hive word. A lawyer named Rachel Greer sat with me later in the little kitchen. Hands folded, face exactly the kind you want in a courtroom. She smelled faintly of citrus and competence. "They'll try the usual," she said. "Contest based on capacity or undue influence. Or they'll manufacture a claim of forgery. We prepare for everything." "We had the will notarized," I said, and felt foolish for being defensive. I was there when she signed it. Mrs. Granger was there, her attorney. Mr. Benson, the neighbor, signed as a witness. "Good," Rachel said. "We'll collect everything, but the social attack will come first. That's how these things work. People smear first and litigate later. It's painful, but it's also predictable." And it was. Within days my name, which had been neutral for years, became a scandal among relatives. My mother told anyone who would listen that I'd manipulated Grandma. Andrew, who had always been good at flinty smiles, spread a rumor that I was special to Eleanor because I'd once fixed her trellis and, therefore, earned her favor. Someone printed out pictures of me laughing with Eleanor and slid them across the conference table at a family gathering as if context meant nothing. The legal filings arrived not as single documents but as a flurry. Petitions alleging that Eleanor lacked testamentary capacity. Affidavits questioning the validity of the signature. A sudden and inconvenient expert witness who would, for a price, suggest the pen stroke looked different. They painted the picture they needed. A frail woman, a needy grandson. A family robbed of what they believed to be theirs by a soft-spoken interloper. I will not pretend there wasn't fear. There was the ordinary, brittle fear of watching the people who raised you try to undo your reason for grief. There's a particular ache that lives in someone who has been accused by their own kin. It's smaller than betrayal and larger than vindication. It's something like being drained of the water you need to be kind. But I breathed through it. I wrote down everything that mattered. Visits, dates, receipts. I cataloged the nights I'd sat on her porch and the mornings I'd cut rosemary stems for her tea. It's unglamorous work, but it's hard to fight a story with nothing at all. Rachel was good at assembling the dull things into a narrative. She pulled medical records. She interviewed Mrs. Granger, who the family had neglected to notice had an impeccable reputation in the county, and Mr. Benson, who smelled like wet straw and had been more observer than rumormonger his whole life. Their sworn statements said what mattered in law language. Eleanor understood what she was doing. She had chosen deliberately and of sound mind. On the morning of the first court date, Andrew's counsel, oil-slick tie, polite sneer, presented a tidy line of attacks. He read a few medical notes that could be wrenched into an argument about lucidity. He suggested, with the graceful cruelty of a practiced cross-examiner, that an elderly woman might sign anything if cajoled by a persistent relative. My mother watched me as if I were an exhibit, waiting for me to give something. An emotional slip, a sign of breathless opportunism, that would satisfy their narrative. I did not give them anything. Instead, I listened. Rachel presented the notarized will. She had Mrs. Granger explain, in plain sentences, the context and the conversation that had accompanied the signature. She had Mr. Benson testify to the mornings we had spent pruning and talking about the roses. She had Eleanor's nurse, Rosa, on the stand, someone who could not be coached by relatives, who had the small but absolute record of daily attentions. Rosa's testimony felt like an enormous hand turned on the tide. She spoke with the easy cadence of someone whose life had been the minutiae of care. She spoke with clarity of mind, Rosa said. She knew what she was signing. She told me, when she left the house in May, that she had decided who she trusted. She said, "Philip understands the roses. He will do right by them." There was an odd hush. People sat up like they had been mistaken about the heat of the sun. The judge listened. The law can be slow and frail and also remorselessly precise. He dispatched the family's motion. There was insufficient proof of fraud or incapacity. He reminded them of the burden of proof, an affirmative weight they had to carry. In the end, he dismissed the contest and the will stood. Felt like a victory. Legally, we had won. Emotionally, something bigger had happened. The family could not simply reframe their story with credibility anymore. But the victory was not immaculate. The social consequences remained. A smear campaign wobbled into other neighborhoods. Side whispers migrated into churches and grocery lines. People I thought were mildly acquainted suddenly texted cautious questions. For a while, it felt like routine had become public spectacle. And then I found the box. I was going through the attic, a small slanted space where Eleanor kept old curtains and the kind of useful junk people don't actually throw away, because Rachel had suggested consolidating documentation in one place. I expected invoices and grocery lists. I found a small shoebox, a plain thing with tape gone brittle at the corners, and my name written on the lid in Eleanor's spidery hand. I sat down on the rafters and opened it with my fingers trembling like a child opening a secret. Inside were letters, handwritten, careful, many of them addressed to me. There were envelopes filled with receipts dating back years, a few photographs I'd never seen, and a small cassette tape with a note. Play if you need them. The letters were not melodramatic. They were practical, warm, and specific. One read, "For the one who showed up in rain. For the one who pruned the roses at odd hours." Another contained the record of visitors. Dates she'd missed, the people who called but never stayed, the relative who said he would come on Thursdays and didn't. And the tape, God, the tape was the kind of thing you imagine in movies. One fixed camera, Eleanor in her favorite chair, a shawl over her lap, looking at the lens like someone peeking through a window into an honest room. "Philip," she said, laughing softly, the way she used to do when something delighted her. "I'm old. I can still remember who talked, who stayed, and who left the dishes for someone else to clean. You were here. You always were." Some of them would come with casseroles and speeches. Others, she looked directly at the camera, beating the air with the authority of someone who had been practiced in being disregarded. Others left a piece of themselves on my porch and went away. I know how they are. I know their habits. If anyone says I didn't know what I did, show them these. And if anyone says I was confused, tell them I knew the rosemary from the time. They taste different if you overwater them. She chuckled, as if some small joke made a world of difference. I replayed the tape until my neighbor, an elderly fellow who fixed radios, came by to ask if the roof needed another shingle. I showed him the letters, and he nodded like someone who had been seeing how the neighborhood shifted for years. "She intended this," he said. "She meant to put things in order." When I showed Rachel the box, she smiled in the way professionals do when the evidence aligns with the law. Pleased, triumphant, a little relieved. "This is everything," she said. "This isn't just an estate. This is motive, memory, record. They can't invent a story to overwrite someone's recorded life." So we continued. They attacked and we responded. We did not aggressively prosecute them back into ruin. My grandmother was not a man who wanted a crucifixion for her heirs, but when their lawyers kept poking and asking for more, Rachel countered with the box and the tape and receipts and a slow, immutable timeline. What had once been their performance became their undoing. The judge, when he saw the full record, admonished the contesters for their cavalier willingness to drag a dead woman's reputation through mud. And then, slowly, the family's momentum broke. Andrew avoided me at gatherings. My mother sent a postcard saying, "I'm sorry for the pain," which is a particular kind of sentence that keeps distance and flirts with absolution. Some relatives stopped calling, and a few who had been lukewarm in their aggression actually came around and helped prune the roses. There's a generous way people change and a stubborn way too. Both happened in small doses. But the box changed the essential balance. My grandmother had anticipated what would happen. She had not been naive. She had, like a gardener, planted evidence as deliberate as rosemary in time. And when she left not just an address and a bank account but a paper path anyone could follow if they were willing to pay attention. That first victory didn't repair the family. It didn't slap a happy label on our broken forms. But it restored something important. The truth that a person's choice, made with clarity, should stand. It also made me understand, painfully but usefully, that sometimes love is not only feeling but stewardship. Eleanor had entrusted me with her house because I had been the person who tended the corners she cared about. I had promised, in a small way by being present, not to let it fall to pieces. In the week that followed, neighbors came by to tell stories. Short things about cups of tea and shared tools. A kid from down the street asked if he could plant a patch of sunflowers in her yard. I said yes. The yard, which had been a stage for other people's performances for a week, began to look like the place it had always been: messy, alive, and stubbornly rooted. For a few weeks after the initial will contest was dismissed, the house was quiet in that uneasy way a battlefield is quiet after the first volley. Silent but waiting. The legal victory hadn't softened my mother's anger. It had sharpened it. Losing publicly is something people like her don't forgive easily, even when they're objectively wrong. The relatives who had cheered her on quietly retreated. Leaving her with a shrinking circle of bitterness, she fed like a backyard stray. I could feel the next move coming, not because she said anything, but because she hadn't. Silence is just a prelude in my family. It's not peace, it's planning. The waiting ended one Thursday morning. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop. A chain of calls, messages, and emails all from one person. We're not done. Enjoy it while it lasts. You can't hide behind her anymore. I know the truth. My mother. She'd filed a second lawsuit. This one wasn't about the will itself. This one was personal. The complaint accused me of undue influence, elder abuse, financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were trying to paint me as someone who manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman into giving me everything she owned. Felt surreal. I'm not easily shaken by words. Years of being overlooked builds a certain tolerance. But seeing your own mother sign her name onto a document calling you an abuser is a specific kind of violence I wasn't prepared for. I forwarded everything to my attorney, Rachel. 5 minutes later she called me. Her tone was professional, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. Philip, she said, I'm going to be very honest with you. They just escalated to a level that could destroy them in court, and they don't know it. I asked her what she meant. I've seen manufactured allegations before. They rarely end well for the person lying. But in this case, they're accusing you of crimes, serious ones. That opens them up to counterclaims they haven't even imagined. I swallowed hard. What do? We respond. And we use the box. I had shown her the box of letters and the cassette tape earlier, but until now it had been supporting evidence, context, sentiment, and clarity on Eleanor's state of mind. Now it was ammunition. We met at her office the next afternoon. She had set aside 2 hours. We ended up talking for 5. We spread everything out across the conference room table. The letters Eleanor wrote about relatives who made promises but never showed. The visitor log she kept, neatly recorded in her handwriting. Receipts for every grocery run, every prescription pickup, every time I brought her something. A printed transcript of the cassette tape. 2 photo albums, mine and hers. A copy of the notary's logbook entry. Her medical reports affirming cognitive stability. A transcript of the hospice nurse's testimony. Rachel tapped the tape transcript with one manicured finger. This alone dismantles their entire case. The transcript wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, measured. Eleanor's voice describing her choices with clarity. But the effect was devastating. She had recorded the exact moment she decided to update the will. Why she trusted me. Why she did not trust others. How often each family member visited. Specific examples of their neglect. Her fear they would try to invalidate her wishes. Her instructions to me. Be steady. They will storm. Reading it the first time had been like someone lifted my ribs and placed something heavy inside. Reading it now was something else. It was armor. Rachel looked through everything and finally said, this isn't just evidence. This is a map of intent. This is the clearest case of testamentary clarity I've ever seen. She paused, then added, and this is also the kind of documentation that, if they continue pushing, could expose your family publicly in ways they haven't considered. I didn't want that. I told her as much. I don't want a war, I said. I just want them to stop. She nodded. I know, but you don't get to choose peace when someone else chooses violence. You can only defend yourself. That night, my mother called. Not to apologize. Not to ask for a conversation. She called to threaten me. You think you're safe because of that piece of paper she signed? She hissed. You think courts can't be swayed? You're naive. We will keep filing. We will bury you in paperwork. You think you're the victim here? You manipulated her. Everyone sees it but you. I listened in silence. She took this as encouragement. She wasn't in her right mind. You took advantage. And if you won't do the right thing and return the estate to the family, then we will take it from you with interest. Then she said something that would burn into me for the rest of my life. You were never meant to have anything. We made you. You owe us. It's strange how one sentence can be a scalpel. I felt something cut away inside me. Something I had been carrying without realizing it. Some small, foolish hope that one day maybe they'd see me, understand me, respect me, something like that. Gone. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say anything cruel. I simply said, all right. She laughed sharply. All right? That's all you have to say. Yes, I said, because what happens next is out of my hands. And I hung up. I had recorded the call. Not out of revenge, but because Rachel told me to document everything. I sent her the audio. She listened, then called me with a voice that was calm in the way a quiet storm is calm. Philip, she said. These changes everything. That recording alone could end their case. Do we use it? I asked. She sighed. If they don't back down, yes. But I want to give them a chance to retreat without nuking their reputations. I almost laughed. My family didn't retreat. They escalated. She continued. I will file a motion to dismiss their complaint with prejudice. And if they push back, I will attach the audio recording and the tape transcript. Once that happens, their credibility becomes radioactive. Will it get public? It could, yes. I closed my eyes. I didn't want that. I didn't want my grandmother's voice dragged into another courtroom. I didn't want her kindness used as a weapon. Even if she had intended her evidence to protect me, I still felt like I was betraying some soft part of her memory. But then I remembered what she said on the tape. Be steady. They will storm. This was the storm. Before the next court date, the judge ordered a mandatory mediation session. A last chance for everyone to settle privately. We met in a small conference room in the courthouse. Across the table, my mother, her husband, my father, my cousin Andrew, their lawyer. None of them looked at me directly. Their lawyer started with artificial civility. We believe Philip unduly influenced the deceased. Rachel cut him off so sharply the room flinched. No, we're not doing that. You filed a claim alleging criminal behavior with zero evidence. Either withdraw the complaint or we proceed forward and the court will hear everything. My mother scoffed. What, everything? He has nothing. Rachel slowly placed the transcript of the tape in the center of the table. Then she placed a USB drive on top of it. Then she placed a printed screenshot of my mother's threats. Their lawyer's expression shifted from confident to concerned. My mother's confidence cracked at the edges. What is that supposed to be? My father asked. A documented, dated record of the deceased's intent, Rachel said, and a recorded phone call in which your wife admits to filing malicious claims to force my client to surrender assets. Andrew's lawyer snatched the transcript and skimmed it. His face drained of color. This is very bad for your case, he whispered to my mother. But my mother forced a brittle smile. This is fake, she said. My mother never recorded anything. She didn't even know how to use a phone properly. Rachel leaned forward, her voice like surgical steel. Perjury is a felony. I strongly advise you to consider which path benefits you. My mother's mask finally cracked. You think you've won? She spat at me. You think she loved you more than us? I didn't answer. She slammed her hand on the table. She was confused. She was old. She didn't mean it. Rachel gently pushed the visitor log toward her. She wrote these entries for 7 years, she said softly. Every visit, every absence, every time Philip showed up when no one else did. My mother stared at the pages but didn't touch them. Andrew cleared his throat. What are your terms? He asked, beaten. Rachel didn't even blink. You withdraw the complaint entirely, with prejudice. You pay Philip's legal fees, and you issue a written statement declaring there was no wrongdoing. My mother exploded. Absolutely not. He owes us. But her lawyer cut her off. It's the best outcome you're going to get, he said quietly. My mother glared at all of us, like she could will the world back into the shape she preferred. But eventually, after more denial, more bargaining, more subtle emotional daggers, they relented. They withdrew the case. They agreed to pay the fees. They signed the statement. But my mother refused to look at me as she left the room. She brushed past me with the same practiced dismissal she'd used my entire life. Except now, it didn't bruise the way it used to. Now, it felt like confirmation. 2 days after the mediation, the smear campaign started. Not legally, socially. My mother called relatives, neighbors, old friends. She painted herself as a victim whose ungrateful son stole her mother's estate. Some believed her, but others didn't. Because when someone repeatedly lies, they forget that people remember things. I didn't respond publicly, but I didn't have to. People started asking questions. People started comparing stories. People remembered the years Grandma spent alone. People remembered who actually visited. And slowly, painfully, the truth began to win. That night, I played the tape again. I don't know what I was expecting. Comfort, guidance, maybe a sign I was doing the right thing. But I had missed something the first time, something quiet. At the very end of the recording, just before the tape cut off, Eleanor said something I hadn't noticed. Philip, some storms you endure, others you outgrow. Know the difference. I sat there in the dark living room, listening to her voice dissolve into static. I didn't know which storm this was yet, but I was learning. After the mediation, I thought things would settle. Not heal, just settle. I underestimated how deeply some people cling to their own delusions. The smear campaign didn't fade. It intensified. And then something happened that pushed everything past the point of no return. They tried to turn the community against me. Small towns don't need much kindling for a fire. My mother spread her version of the story everywhere. He manipulated her. He isolated her from the family. He convinced her to cut us out. He's after the money. I wasn't surprised she lied. I was surprised how quick some people were to believe her. I walked into the grocery store one morning and the cashier, someone I'd known since middle school, asked, "So, is it true you sued your own mother?" I felt something heavy sink inside me. I hadn't sued anyone, but truth has a slower stride than gossip. Later that afternoon, a woman from church called and asked why I refused to return the inheritance. That language, return, hit me like a slap. Return implies something stolen. A lie spoken often enough can distort reality for people who want to be entertained. While some people believed my mother without question, others started remembering things they'd previously ignored. One neighbor messaged me, "Your grandmother always said you were the only one who visited her. I don't believe a word of what they're saying." Another, "Your mom didn't even show up for Eleanor's birthday last year. You did." And from Mrs. Patel, the town pharmacist, "Your grandmother told me she changed her will years ago. She said she wanted to make sure it went to someone who actually loved her." Piece by piece, the smear campaign started unraveling. Not because of anything I said, because my grandmother had lived a life that contradicted their narrative. I was cleaning out the attic again, mostly to distract myself from the mess, when something caught my eye. Another small container tucked behind a stack of old winter blankets. It wasn't taped like the first one. It was carefully tied shut with string. Inside, receipts dating back nearly 12 years. Notes Eleanor had written about every hospital visit. Printed emails from relatives who promised to visit and never came. A journal where she wrote small observations about each family member. And a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, long, thoughtful, painfully honest. She wrote, "Philip, if they ever try to rewrite my life, let this stand as witness." She listed who visited, who didn't, who lied to her, who asked for money, who pressured her about nursing homes, who mocked her memory lapses, and who, her words, kept showing up even when no one asked him to. She even referenced the exact day she chose to leave me the entire estate. "You were the only one who came that afternoon. You brought tea and cut roses. I made my decision then." It was dated 3 years before she passed. 3 years. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't a last-minute change. It was intentional. It was love expressed through planning. When I showed the second box to Rachel, she pinched the bridge of her nose and exhaled deeply. You realize, she said, this is the kind of documentation lawyers dream of. This could not only close the case, it could expose their entire claim as malicious. I nodded, but something inside me resisted. I don't want to destroy them, I said quietly. She looked at me with both softness and firmness. Philip, they're not hesitating to destroy you. At some point, choosing peace becomes choosing surrender. I knew she was right, but knowing doesn't make choosing easier. Just when I thought the situation couldn't escalate further, I received an email from Rachel. Call me ASAP. I called immediately. Her voice was tight. They filed another motion, she said. This time they're claiming you emotionally coerced her by restricting her social interaction. My stomach dropped. What does that even mean? In plain English, they're implying you prevented other family from seeing her, so you could isolate her and influence the will. It was absurd. I had no legal authority to restrict anyone from seeing her. I didn't even live with her, but absurd claims can still be damaging. Rachel continued. They also submitted sworn statements from 2 relatives claiming you told them not to visit because she was too tired. I laughed in disbelief. That never happened. I know, she said, and I already have a plan. At the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Spectators, neighbors, distant relatives hoping for spectacle. My mother sat at the front table, spine rigid, jaw clenched. My father avoided looking at me altogether. Andrew looked nervous, like he was finally beginning to realize this might not end well. Their lawyer stood and delivered his argument. Your Honor, we believe the decedent was isolated by the respondent, which calls into question the validity of her final testament. Rachel whispered to me. Here we go. Their lawyer continued. We have testimony from relatives stating he discouraged visits. Furthermore, the decedent was in a vulnerable state. Rachel stood. Objection. This is speculation without evidence. The judge nodded. Sustained. Proceed carefully, counselor. Their lawyer tried again. It is our belief that the respondent inserted himself into the decedent's life too. Rachel rose once more. No, Your Honor, that is not belief. That is an accusation of manipulation without basis. And we have documented evidence to the contrary. Show it, the judge said. Rachel approached the bench with the transcript of the first tape, the second box, and several of Eleanor's letters. But she didn't hand them over immediately. Instead, she addressed the courtroom. In cases like this, she began, accusations are easy, lies are easy, but the truth takes planning, takes intention. And in this case, the decedent documented her clarity, her choices, and her reasons explicitly. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Rachel placed the tape transcript on the judge's desk. This recording was made by Eleanor Harrow herself. In it, she explains why she chose her grandson as her heir. Murmurs filled the room. Rachel lifted another document. This is her visitor log. Meticulous, detailed. It shows who visited, who didn't, and who made promises but never followed through. More murmurs. Then she revealed the final piece. This is a letter she wrote, sealed, and addressed to my client. In it, she states explicitly that she chose him because he was the one who consistently showed up emotionally and physically. She paused. And because she anticipated that the rest of her family would contest her wishes. That line hit the room like a thunderclap. My mother's face drained entirely of color. Andrew's lawyer looked like he wanted to escape through the floor. The judge read for several minutes in silence. Then he looked up. The petitioner's claims are unfounded. There is no evidence of undue influence or isolation. In fact, the documentation suggests the opposite. He turned to my mother. Mrs. Thomas, these allegations border on harassment. Her jaw trembled. The judge continued. I am dismissing this motion with prejudice, and I strongly advise you to reconsider any further filings. This court will not entertain baseless accusations made in bad faith. I didn't breathe for several seconds. We'd won. Not just legally, narratively, publicly, irrefutably. After the hearing, I stepped outside to get some air. My mother followed me. I expected yelling. What I didn't expect was collapse. She looked at me with a mixture of bitterness and panic. How did you do it? She demanded. How did you turn her against us? I didn't, I said quietly. You did that yourselves. She shook her head violently. She loved me. She loved us. She wouldn't have done this on purpose. She didn't cut you out, I said. She chose someone who was there for her. That's not the same thing, she snapped. She didn't owe you everything, but she owed you something? My mother blinked, stunned. Like no one had ever asked her that before. She raised you, she whispered. She gave you everything. You're supposed to honor that. She raised all of us, I said, but only one of us showed up for her in return. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing there. Then she said the quiet part out loud. You took what should have been ours. And I finally said what I'd been holding back for months. It was never yours. She stepped back as if I'd struck her. For once, she had nothing left to say. By the following week, their lawsuit was dead. Their smear campaign weakened. People who once whispered began apologizing. The truth had finally outrun the lies. The house felt different, too. Not haunted. Not heavy. Just mine. My grandmother's laughter felt like it echoed through the walls. Not in a ghostly way. In a remembered way. Peaceful way. The strange thing about winning is how anticlimactic it feels. After months of stress, anxiety, accusations, and legal warfare, the world didn't suddenly brighten. There was no triumphant theme song. No cinematic sunrise. Just silence. A heavy, unfamiliar silence. For the first time in almost a year, there were no emails from lawyers. No cryptic social media posts from relatives. No cold stares at the grocery store. Just quiet. I didn't realize how exhausting noise could be until it stopped. In the first week after the court ruling, I stayed mostly home. Not out of fear. Just inertia. The adrenaline that had kept me functioning evaporated, leaving me tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I'd walk around the house, my house, and notice little things, the creak in the step outside her old study, the tiny crack in the hallway paint she always meant to fix, the faint scent of lavender from her favorite drawer sachets, her old tea mug still sitting on the high shelf. I never noticed how many parts of this place were touched by her presence until she wasn't here to occupy them. It wasn't grief exactly, more like remembering how to breathe in a world she no longer lived in. One afternoon I found myself sitting at her old piano. She never taught me to play, but as a kid I'd fall asleep to her practicing scales. I pressed one key, just one. The sound rang out, clear, lonely. I didn't press a second. It showed up in my mailbox 3 days after the hearing. Plain envelope. My name written in handwriting that wasn't familiar. Inside was a short note. Philip, I heard about the case. I would like to talk. Dad, that was it. Not love, Dad. Not your father. Just a signature that felt more like a formality than a name. Part of me expected this. Another part hoped he'd fade out of my life quietly, the way he faded out of my grandmother's. I didn't reply, but he didn't give up. 2 days later, another note. Your mother is taking this very hard. The least you could do is help us understand why she did what she did. The least I could do? The least? I folded the paper once, then again, then tore it down the middle. It wasn't with him. It was with Rachel. We met in a quiet cafe in town. The kind with soft lighting, mismatched chairs, and a pianist who always seemed to be playing something nostalgic. She saw the tension in my face before I said a word. Notes from your father? She asked. I nodded. I keep thinking I should just ignore them, but part of me wonders if talking would help. She shook her head gently. Help who? I opened my mouth but nothing came out. Philip, she said softly. Your family isn't reaching out for clarity. They're reaching out for control. They want closure that paints them as the victims. Maybe, I muttered, though I knew she was right. If you talk to them right now, she continued, they'll twist your words, twist your intentions, twist your grandmother's memory. Not because they're evil, because they can't accept responsibility. I stared at my coffee. Then what am I supposed to do? I asked. She leaned back. Live your life. That's the one thing they can't stand. Funny how healing doesn't announce itself. It showed up in small, unexpected ways. The first time I laughed at something stupid online. The first night I slept for more than 5 hours. The first morning I woke up without feeling dread. The first grocery trip where no one looked at me sideways. The first time I cooked and the food actually tasted good. And then there was the day I finally moved some of Eleanor's things. Not to erase her, just to begin. I boxed up old linens, outdated paperwork, some chipped cups she insisted on keeping. Each item had weight, not physical, emotional. But the real emotional landmine was her journal. I'd seen it in the second box but never opened it. Not fully. That night, I let myself read a few pages. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was simple. Daily updates, little joys, little frustrations. But every few pages, there'd be a line that made my breath catch. Philip stopped by today. Bless that boy. He never leaves without doing the dishes. He brought that lemon cake again. I pretend I don't like it so he doesn't spend money on me. But it's delicious. He fixed the curtain rod. Says it was easy. It probably wasn't. He smiled more today. I hope life is kind to him. He deserves more than he gets. I had to close the journal. It was too much. Too honest. Too full of love I didn't know I needed until it wasn't here anymore. A week later, my brother showed up. No warning. No text. Just knocked on my front door like we were siblings who joked around at Thanksgiving. I opened the door halfway. He looked thinner. More tired. Can I come in? He asked. I hesitated. Just for a minute, he added. I stepped aside. He didn't sit. He just stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't sure whether to apologize or defend himself. He started with the wrong choice. This whole thing. It didn't have to go the way it did. I stared at him. You sued me. You forced me to, he said immediately. You took everything. I didn't take anything. I snapped. It was left to me. You weren't entitled to a cent. He rubbed his forehead. You know Mom's not okay, right? That's not my responsibility. She thinks you're punishing her. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm living my life. He swallowed. You could have just shared some of it. That's all she wanted. I laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. She wanted money more than she wanted a relationship with her own mother. That's not something I can fix. He looked at me then, really looked. For the first time since this nightmare started, I saw something human in his expression. Not greed, not resentment, just exhaustion. Dad says we should apologize, he muttered. But Mom says apologizing means admitting she was wrong. She was wrong. I know, he said quietly. I think deep down she knows too. Silence filled the room. Then he said the one thing that almost broke me. I miss you, man. I didn't know whether to cry or scream, but I did neither. I'm not ready, I said, and I don't know if I ever will be. He nodded slowly. I figured you'd say that. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. For what it's worth, Grandma made the right choice. He didn't wait for a response. He left, and I sank into a chair, shaking. Relief, sadness, something like closure. It was messy but real. 2 days later, someone else knocked. But this time it wasn't family. It was Mrs. Patel, the pharmacist. She held a small bag in her hand. This was left at the pharmacy months ago, she said. Your grandmother ordered it for you. It came in late. Inside was a small bottle of cologne. Simple, old-fashioned. The brand I used when I was 19. There was a tiny folded note taped to it. Thought this might help you feel confident on big days. Love you, E. I didn't cry immediately. I stood there with the bottle in my hand, my heart pounding, my throat tight. Mrs. Patel touched my arm gently. She adored you, she said. She talked about you every time she came in. I finally broke. Right there on my front porch. She didn't judge. She didn't speak. She just stayed until I was steady again. Some people show up when it matters. Some people never do. I was learning the difference. A few nights later, I sent a message to someone I hadn't talked to in weeks. Sophie. We'd only been on 2 dates before everything with the lawsuit spiraled out of control. I had put things on pause. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I didn't want to drag her into a storm that wasn't hers. Now, things were calmer. Or at least survivable. I typed, "Hey, I know it's been a while. Things got complicated. But I was wondering if you'd like to get coffee again sometime." I expected no reply, but her answer came 2 minutes later. "I'd like that." I never stopped liking that. For the first time in a long time, something in my chest felt warm. Not relief, not escape, hope. A small, cautious, stubborn hope. The kind that grows quietly. The kind that feels like healing. Winning the inheritance wasn't the victory. The victory was understanding that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't manipulative. I wasn't the villain in their story. I was simply the only one who treated Eleanor like she mattered. Not because she had money, but because she was my family. Real family. The kind that shows up. The kind that stays. The kind that chooses you not because of obligation, but because of love. My mother chose entitlement. My father chose avoidance. My brother chose convenience. And I chose peace. I chose myself. I chose the memory of the only person who ever chose me first. And that choice, more than anything else, is what freed me. The last gift, the almost reunion, and the day I finally let her go. Healing is strange. Some days you wake up feeling almost normal. Other days, it hits you like the weight of everything you escaped but didn't fully process. Part 4 ended with hope. Sophie replying, life quieting, my heart easing. Part 5 is about what came next. What my family tried one last time. What Eleanor left behind. And what I finally chose to do with my life. Because winning the case didn't give me peace. What came after did. About a month after the court ruling, I got a text from my brother. I hadn't heard from him since our conversation in my living room. The one where he admitted Mom wouldn't apologize because apologizing meant admitting she was wrong. This time, all he wrote was, "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted closure. Part of me simply didn't want to hurt anymore. I agreed to meet him at a neutral spot, an outdoor cafe in Midtown. When I arrived, Lucas was already there. He looked different, less arrogant, less polished, more human. He didn't start with excuses or justification. Just, "Mom wants to have dinner with you." I sat down slowly. He continued, "She's not doing well. She's depressed or something. She barely leaves her room." I didn't respond. He kept going. "She thinks losing the inheritance broke her." I finally spoke, calm, flat. "It wasn't the inheritance that broke her. It was the truth." He looked down at his hands. "Dad thinks you should meet with her. Clear the air." I laughed. Not mocking, just tired. Every air-clearing conversation in our family has been them telling me why they were right and why I misunderstood. "This time might be different," he said softly. "Why?" "Because they lost." He winced because he knew I was right. I leaned back. "Lucas, I'm not going to dinner. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He swallowed. "She's still your mother. And I was still her son," I said. "But she treated me like an obstacle." He didn't argue. He just nodded. Slowly, sadly. Before he left, he said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For everything. I can't fix Mom or Dad. But I can fix myself." It wasn't enough to undo the damage. But it mattered. More than I expected. A week later, I received a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten letter. From her. It read, "Philip, I don't know how to talk to you anymore. You think I only cared about the money. But you don't understand how hard life has been. Losing the inheritance hurt. But losing you hurt more. I want my family back. Please come home. Mom." I sat with the letter for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. It was grief painted as guilt. But not remorse. She said, "Losing the inheritance hurt. Before losing you hurt more." That told me everything. I didn't reply. Some people think regret is the same as apology. It isn't. Regret is about them. Apology is about you. One evening, I met Sophie again. We grabbed coffee at a local bookstore cafe. No drama. No heaviness. Just warmth. She asked how I was doing, but not in the way people ask to be polite. She asked like she genuinely wanted to understand the parts of me no one else had noticed before. Over pastries and shared glances, she listened to me talk about everything. The legal war. The loneliness. Eleanor. My mother's letter. My brother's attempt at reconciliation. She didn't give solutions. She didn't judge. She just said, "You're grieving more than a person. You're grieving the idea of a family you never had." That sentence hit me harder than any lawsuit. Because she was right. For so long, I believed I could earn love by being patient, quiet, helpful, obedient. But family doesn't work like that. Love isn't payment. Love isn't conditional. Love isn't something you compete for. It's given. Freely. Eleanor gave it freely. And that's why everything else hurt so much. After our coffee, Sophie kissed me. Soft, gentle, reassuring. It felt like the first real affection I'd received in years. Not because she wanted something, but because she wanted me. I wasn't used to that, but I wanted to be. 2 weeks later, I finally opened the one thing I'd been avoiding, Eleanor's final letter. Not the one in her will. Not the legal document. The personal letter she wrote, for when he feels lost. It was left in her desk drawer, inside an envelope sealed with wax. I sat on the floor of her study, holding it in trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting, sprawling, elegant, unmistakably hers. It read, "My sweetest Philip, if you are reading this, the world has taken something from you. Perhaps your peace. Perhaps your hope. Perhaps the love you deserved but did not receive. I want you to remember something. You are not alone because you are unlovable. You are alone because you love quietly. Quiet children grow into quiet adults. But quiet does not mean weak. Quiet does not mean lesser. Quiet does not mean invisible. You see people clearly, Philip. Even when they do not see you back. That is your gift. And one day, someone will see you exactly as you are. They will not be intimidated by your heart, nor confused by your kindness. They will treasure you. If you have not yet found them, be patient. If you have, be brave. And if your family has hurt you again, forgive them from afar. You owe them nothing but the truth of who you are. Live softly but stand firm. Love freely but protect your peace. I am proud of you, my boy. I always was. I always will be. Eleanor ****. By the time I reached the end, my vision was blurred. I pressed the letter against my face and cried harder than I had since the funeral. Not because it hurt, but because it healed. I didn't speak to my mother again, or my father, or my uncle. Even my aunts and cousins kept a respectful distance after the court case exposed everything. But one night, sitting by the window with Eleanor's letter beside me, I realized something. I didn't hate them anymore, pitted them. A family who valued money over love is a family that had already lost long before the will was ever written. Forgiving them didn't mean letting them back in. It meant letting myself go. Months passed. Sophie became a constant presence in my life. We took slow walks in the botanical garden. We cooked disastrous pasta together. She fell asleep on my couch reading. She started leaving her mug next to my sink. Something that once would have annoyed me, now felt home-like. One evening, she held my hand and asked, "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" I thought about it. Really thought. "I don't know," I said. "But I know I won't go back to who I was around them." She squeezed my hand. "That's enough." And it was. Because I wasn't living to please ghosts anymore. I wasn't living to prove my worth to people who chose not to see it. I wasn't living in the shadow of a family who only remembered I existed when money was involved. I was living for me, and maybe for someone else now too. On the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, I visited her grave. I brought her favorite lemon cake, a small bouquet of white carnations, and her final letter folded neatly. As I knelt by the gravestone, the wind was soft, the air warm, the world so painfully alive. I whispered, "I'm okay now. I think I'm finally okay." It wasn't entirely true, but it was more true than ever before. As I turned to leave, a thought settled over me. Eleanor didn't leave me money. She left me freedom. Freedom from a family who saw me as a resource. Freedom from a lifetime of quiet suffering. Freedom to start again. And maybe most importantly, freedom to finally be seen. Last words. My family still tries occasionally. A text, a letter, a voicemail dripping with selective memory. But I don't respond. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Some stories end not with reconciliation, but with release. Eleanor always said I loved quietly. Now I live loudly enough for the both of us. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing who I let in, not who I hope will stay.
Thank you everyone for taking your time to listen to my stories that are posted in this channel. Your engagement and entertainment are a huge part of my motivation, and I hope you all will continue on supporting me in the future. Once again, thank you for watching my videos. For more content like this, please consider subscribing to my channel.